And where did it all start? It started in southern Iraq, also known as Mesopotamia. In the Bible, it's referred to as the Chaldees or Chaldea. Now, one of the tragic things of the turmoil that's going on in the Middle East is the fact that what you actually have are cousins, family people fighting each other, because the Arabs trace their lineage back to the biblical patriarch Abraham, and the Jews trace their heritage back to the biblical patriarch Abraham. So they're all related, but they can't get along. If we could go back to that, to the map, the Bible tells us that Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. So he was not a Jew. He was not even a Semite. He was a Sumerian. And he had knowledge from the ancient Sumerian culture. And he brought that knowledge where? To Egypt. This is where the great Egyptian civilization got started, with the knowledge that was brought out of Mesopotamia. Now we get to the question, and now the rest of it, more knowledge was brought by Moses. Except who was Moses? There is a very cogent argument to be made that Moses is not a name, it's a title. Moses, meaning the pretender to the throne, the one true heir. And now we go and we look at the story of Moses. Oh, he was hidden away as a baby. He was placed in a basket of bulrushes, floated down the river to relatives, raised by foster parents, educated as an Egyptian, believed in the one true God. Now, you know what? If you go back and study about Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV, you find that it's the same story. Hidden away as a baby, placed in a basket of bulrushes, floated down the river, raised by foster family. The foster family were Hebrew slaves. Well, you all know, any of y'all who have adopted or are adopted or are adopting children, your real parents are who raise you, not who gives birth to you. Okay? We all know this. So Amenhotep is raised by Hebrews who instill in him the idea of the one true God. And when he assumes the throne as Pharaoh, he changes his name to Akhenaten, meaning the one who worships Atim, the one true God. And even in the Bible, it says he was an Egyptian or had great knowledge of Egypt, was very powerful in Egypt. How does a Hebrew slave get that? So now that whole story takes on a whole different coloration. And when he is overthrown because he's shaken up the religious hierarchy of the day, which was making tons of money because everybody had to pay homage to all the various gods. They didn't like that, so they overthrew Akhenaten and they banished him. And when he left, he took his family with him, the Israelites or the Hebrews. And they considered him still the one true king, or Moses. But whether or not that's true, we find again that all of the information flows from Iraq or Samaria into Egypt. And of course we know that from Egypt then all this knowledge was centered in the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, which then went on to the ancient mystery schools of Greece and then on into the Romans, and this was our Western heritage. Now, all of this was accumulated regardless of who Moses was, whether he was a title or a name. When the Israelites were sent out of Egypt and freed, they were told to take what you need. Well, some of them, I'm sure that meant take some clothing, take some food, but some of them meant take everything that wasn't nailed down. And they took gold, silver, they took scrolls, they took all kinds of things on their travels in the wilderness. And we know that during their travels in the wilderness, they attacked and conquered a variety of people and city-states. And as was the habit in that time, oops, are we out of time? Oh, thank God, I saw something here. Okay, good, we're on track. I got to wrap this up though, because I know you're going to have some questions. So I'll make it quick. So they got this vast treasure hoard, gold, silver, but they've also got knowledge passed down from Samaria. And I'm sure they got tired of lugging all this through the desert. So at one point, Solomon built a huge temple. And part of it, of course, was to worship. Part of it was to house the Ark of the Covenant, their communication device for God, and to house and warehouse all of this fabulous treasure. So what happened to it? Interestingly enough, when the Romans took Palestine, they didn't just move in and conquer it. They worked a deal. They said, look, if you'll let us, you can keep your king and you can keep your lifestyle if you'll just pay homage to Rome. And they said, okay. And King Herod was installed, built his palace over the old, at the same place as the old Solomon Temple, there on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is now, of course, a Muslim mosque, the Dome of the Rock. But then the Jews began to chafe under the Roman leadership, and in 66 AD there was a revolt. I'm sure it didn't just start overnight and it didn't end overnight. The Romans then sent troops in and they conquered the whole thing. Well, when they came in, they sacked Jerusalem and they sacked the temple. King Herod's palace at that time, formerly the Temple of Solomon. But they didn't get everything, because the Jews knew what were happening, and they took everything they could and they buried it under the temple in a series of cave systems and stuff, and they carefully hid it away from the Romans. But the Romans nevertheless got a good portion of it, maybe even half or something, but they got a good portion. And what did they do with it? Well, they took it as booty back to Rome. 400 years later, Alaric the Goth sacks Rome. And again, as the way it happens, they took everything out of there. They took what the treasure, half the treasure of Solomon, and they took it back to their home stomping grounds, which was where? The Languedoc region of southern France. And they hid it in the cave systems down there. And this was both the wealth, treasure, and particularly the information and knowledge that was passed along to a group of people that became known as the Cathars. And the Cathars then were a thorn in the side of the Roman church because they had straight information. They had information that went contrary to what the Roman church was trying to put out, and that's why they never went along with their program. This, of course, gave rise to the Albigensian Crusade, where the Pope sent a papal army through the Languedoc region and murdered everybody that was suspected of being a Cathar. That's where the expression got started, by the way, when they besieged the town of Béziers. They sent a message back to the Pope and said, how are we going to know the Cathars from everybody else? And the Pope is supposedly told him, he said, well, kill them all and let God sort them out. And we've heard that same quote. I heard that during Vietnam. You know, how do we tell the VC from the Vietnamese? Kill them all, let God sort them out. So this, but they didn't, obviously they didn't kill all the Cathars. Some of the wealthy families there in southern France were Cathars. And they knew, because they had access to this knowledge, that the rest of the treasure of Solomon is buried over beneath Herod's palace in Jerusalem. So they fomented the Crusades, ostensibly to retake the Holy Land, but in reality these French families, the Blanchards and Saint Bernard and these folks, they knew this treasure was over there and they wanted it. And so sure enough, in 1099 they conquered Jerusalem, and who shows up but 9 knights from southern France, all connected to these Cathari families. And they say, we want to form a new military order called the Knights of the Temple. And so King Baldwin says, okay. And so he allows them to form the Knights Templar. And they were supposed to be guarding the roads there, but they never did. What they did was excavate under the temple and regained the rest of the treasure of Solomon. Again, not only a treasure of gold, silver, and precious stones, but a treasure of knowledge. And they hauled it from Jerusalem back through Rome and back into the Languedoc region. And now at this point, the treasure of Solomon is reunited and hidden away in southern France in the area of Rennes-le-Château. That's what the mystery's all about. That's the treasure. Now, whether Father Saunier ever actually found the treasure is open to question. I suspect not. But he knew that that's what it was all about. He knew that this was in the right area, and that's why he was suddenly wealthy and all this strange things went on with Rennes-le-Château. And this was just a picture of the knights that they showing their Maltese cross. And of course, then the Pope goes after the Knights Templars because he knows that they have dangerous information plus wealth. What happened to the reunited wealth near Rennes-le-Château? In March of 1944, Otto Skorzeny, the guy in the cap with the binoculars, leads a battalion of SS troops to southern France, working off of the notes and publications of a German named Otto Rahn, who had been to Rennes-le-Château several times in the 20s and 30s and had working closely with Heinrich Himmler and his SS group that was heavily involved in the occult. They felt like they knew where the treasure was, and on March the 16th, 1944, they send the Germans into they couldn't do it before then because southern France was part of Vichy France and technically was supposed to be free France, and they didn't want to cause any more trouble. But in September of 43, Rome fell and Mussolini was deposed, and at the same time that the Germans rescued Mussolini off the mountaintop, they also poured into southern France and took over the whole country. So now they're able to freely operate in France, and they sent troops down there in March of 44. He sends a one-word telegram back to Berlin on March the 16th that says, "Eureka, I found it. The greatest, most fabulous treasure in the history of the world, both of riches and of knowledge, is now in the hands of the Nazis." They took it back to Berchtesgaden, which you can see the diagram here has an underground labyrinth of hidden systems and caves and bunkers and everything else. But it probably did not remain there. It was taken out of Germany on something called Aktion Adlerflut, or Operation Eagle Flight. This was instigated in August of 1944 by the head of the German Central Bank and the head of the IG Farben Combine and Martin Bormann, who by that time was running the show. Hitler was pretty much over the edge with megalomania plus all the drugs that he was being fed. These guys took the combined wealth of Europe that they had looted plus Solomon's treasure, and they created 750 corporations all around the world. Their connecting banks were the Bank of International Settlements, the Deutsche Bank, which today is still a powerhouse in the financial world, Chase Bank, which later became Chase Manhattan, and I particularly want you to notice Union Banking Corporation. Because in 1942, one of the chief stockholders of the Union Banking Corporation was prosecuted in this country by the Justice Department under the Trading with the Enemies Act, and they accused him of being nothing but a financial front man for Hitler and the Nazis. And that man was Prescott Bush, and also his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. So when you hear people say that these people running the country today are a bunch of neo-Nazis, I want you to stand up and say that is not so. There's nothing neo about them. They're the real old Nazis.